course, tonight we're going to be visiting with the story of Maria von Trapp that we all know. Well, look, and I'll do a show of hands, but I'll make it easy. Is there anyone here who has not ever seen or heard The Sound of Music? See, that would be pretty easy. Or they're just embarrassed to admit it. Also, I would like to thank the Greenville County Library for sponsoring our Tuesday talks. And I want to point out that the library has culled their wonderful collection. And at the back of the room, there are books and CDs and such that are related to tonight's topic. So if you would like to learn more information about Maria von Trapp, The Sound of Music, any of that, there are books back there. If you don't have a library card, you can, up at the front desk, get a library card. I should mention, as you saw them as you were coming in, the volunteers here. Chautauqua owes a lot to the volunteers who make these shows possible. And I always want to be sure to thank the volunteers, because without them, we couldn't have these programs for you. Our speaker tonight is Marianne Strobel. She is a graduate of Mount Holyoke College. She earned her PhD from Duke University. Her achievements include being awarded the Southern Conference Faculty Member of the Year designation. She was named the William Montgomery Burnett Professor of History. She knows her history. She served as the former chair of the history department, as well as the former chair of the faculty at our very own Furman University. And before coming to where I should mention, she specialized in recent U.S. history as well as American women's history. And prior to coming to Furman, she taught at the University of North Carolina at Charlotte, the University of Montana, the University of Virginia, and Phillips Exeter Academy. She is a long-time enthusiastic supporter of Chautauqua and serves on the Chautauqua Board of Directors. So here to tell you all you would like to know about Maria von Trapp prior to meeting her in person this summer, ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Marianne Strobel.
Thank you very much. And let me first start out by saying I don't sing. So if you came expecting me to do that, you're going to be disappointed and you can leave. But I think hopefully maybe the June performer will do that. And I'm not real good at computers either. So if I mess things up, don't get alarmed. Well, many of us here are of a certain age. And clearly, from what Larry found out, we all have seen the movie The Sound of Music. It was released in 1965, based on the Broadway musical of the same name. And for 5 years, The Sound of Music was the highest grossing film in history. It also won major Academy Awards. Well, how can any of us forget the opening scenes of that movie? How can we forget the opening scenes of the movie when we are first introduced to Maria and she wanders with open arms through the magnificent mountains of the Austrian Alps, all the while singing "The Hills Are Alive" with the sound of music? The story of Maria and the von Trapp family singers has long been one that fascinates fans of Julie Andrews, of good choral music, and of the history of the German-Austrian Anschluss. But what we may ask is the true story of Maria, and how does it vary from Hollywood's portrait of her and her family? Maria Augusta Kutsera was born on a train on January 26, 1905. Her parents had been heading from their small Austrian town or village to a hospital in Vienna. They never made it. She was born on the train. In other unusual and really tragic circumstances, Maria's mother died of pneumonia before Maria was the age of 3. Her grief-stricken father basically abandoned her to the care of a cousin who became Maria's foster mother. This is when things get a little more confusing. Maria's father, who had long traveled the world, himself died when Maria was 9. So her foster mother's son-in-law, this is what's so confusing to me, figuring out this genealogy, his name was Uncle Franz. And he then became Maria's legal guardian. He was a socialist, anti-Catholic judge who would burst into abusive language when hearing the word religion. According to her autobiography, Maria, My Own Story, Uncle Franz beat Maria almost always for imagined offenses such as skipping school or going out with her girlfriends or spending money on cookies or candy. Maria wrote, "Fear entered my life." Such treatment went on for several years until, as Maria put it, then the day came when suddenly it was as if someone had turned on a light switch in me, and I no longer had the dreadful fear of my uncle. All of a sudden, I didn't care anymore what he might say or do because I would be beaten anyhow. I resolved, all right, why don't I do it all and at least be spanked for a purpose? She went on to say, I blossomed. This meant a major transformation from what she had once described herself as being a quiet, fearful child who dared talk to people. Maria then went on to explain, after her transformation, unfortunately, my imprudence, my impetuousness, and my wrongly applied sense of humor constantly got me into trouble. I was the horror and the fright of my teachers. They couldn't possibly punish me enough. My imagination could always invent worse and juicier things of mischief. Thus, the spirited Maria that we think of from The Sound of Music began to emerge from her shell. And what about Uncle Franz? He eventually was committed to an insane asylum. Even before Uncle Franz met his fate, Maria, upon graduating from high school, ran away to a resort community where she believed she could earn money working at a hotel that would help pay for her college tuition. She was completely inexperienced and looked, as she described herself, like a beanstalk with long braids. She could find no work as a hotel maid. But then a manager of one of the hostels asked her if she could be an umpire in a tennis tournament. She knew nothing about that game. She faked her knowledge, though, of the sport. She got the job, and she was paid good money for doing so. This allowed Maria to have funds to put toward her education at the State Teachers College of Progressive Education in Vienna, where she had already earned a scholarship. To have money for clothes and books and things of that sort, Maria also found an odd job as doing fine embroidery for fine lingerie work. And the work was sponsored by the American Society of Friends, who we know of as the Quakers. Interesting. Still, Maria had no money to pay for the concerts which she loved. So instead of paying for concerts, she began attending church services to hear the music that was played there. Perhaps influenced by her long contact with Uncle Franz, she rejected the doctrines of the Roman Catholic Church and even ridiculed her friends who were devout Christians. Such an attitude lasted until Maria's senior year at college, when on a Palm Sunday, after a church service featuring the music of Bach, I might mention, she confronted a priest with her disbelief, and he invited her to his office for a chat. In a private conversation, the priest, who was a wise Jesuit theologian, told Maria that God loved her and would eradicate her sins. She later wrote, "From that little bit the Father had said to me, I realized that not only had I been wrong myself, but I had been an instrument of the devil to get other people to go astray." Now I try desperately to regain all the lost souls I felt on my conscience. With this started a completely new life for me. Once again, God was back in my life. Upon her graduation from college that spring of 1923, Maria made the momentous decision that she would give up the mountain climbing that she loved, and she would do so as a way of devoting herself to God. She became determined to bury herself in a medieval convent. And so she took the train to Salzburg and asked a policeman to direct her to the strictest convent in town. Seriously. He pointed out the Benedictine convent of Abbey of Nürnberg, there it is, where she knocked on the gates. Whoever answered the gates, she said to them, "I want to see the boss." Now, can you imagine saying this at a convent? Miraculously, she was interviewed by an abbess who logically questioned her motives. Explaining she was at the Abbey on her own accord, Maria replied, if anybody had sent me, I wouldn't be here. I haven't obeyed anybody yet. Unbelievably, with those words, Maria was received into the Abbey and would spend the next 2 years of her life there. Concerning her years in the Abbey, Maria would later write, "I was constantly in trouble." She said, "I was the black sheep of the community." She broke most rules. She whistled in the Abbey, slid down banisters, contradicted her superiors, and tried to chat during silent mealtimes. She constantly broke things like cups and saucers as well. Yet, as Maria realized, I learned merely by daily observance to curb my self-will, to keep my mouth shut when I was almost bursting at the seams, to obey even if I did not understand why. This was the first place where I really felt at home, secure and loved. Maria especially adored the fifth graders who she taught in the Abbey, despite the strict pedagogy practiced by the Abbey, which contrasted dramatically with what she had learned at her progressive college in Vienna. One day in 1926, while she was teaching in the Abbey, Maria was called into the office of the Reverend Mother Superior. This was a very rare honor for someone of her rank. The Mother Superiors told Maria that she was going to be separated from the Abbey for 10 months. She was being assigned to teach Maria, who was the daughter of a certain Captain or Baron von Trapp. The young girl had contracted scarlet fever and had then developed a heart murmur, and she could not attend regular school. So the Reverend Mother said to Maria, "It seems to be the will of God that you are the one we can spare and send out to teach little Maria." George von Trapp was a widower. He's a good-looking guy there, whose first wife had died of scarlet fever 4 years before. He had been granted the title of Baron as a result of his exemplary service during World War I. He was a submarine commander in the Austro-Hungarian Navy, I might say. He had even received the Cross of the Empress Maria Theresa, which was the highest award an Austrian military officer could achieve in a time of war. We may remember from The Sound of Music that von Trapp was a wealthy man. Actually, his wealth came from his late wife, Agatha Whitehead. She was the granddaughter of Robert Whitehead, the 19th century British inventor of the modern torpedo. The love affair between George and Agatha had begun with the launch of the first Austrian submarine and continued well past her death. So devastated was George by his wife's passing that he moved the young family from Pola in Croatia into a new home in Salzburg, free from painful memories. There's the Villa von Trapp. As we know from the Hollywood movie, Maria at first resisted leaving the abbey for the Van Trapp estate. But she was a good nun in training, and she obeyed the orders given her. By all reports, including her own, Maria arrived at the impressive Villa von Trapp wearing a rather outrageous and dated dress. I wish I had a picture of it. And a bizarre hat that looked like a helmet that had previously belonged to another novitiate. Her clothes had been given away to the poor long before that. Under Maria's arm was her beloved guitar from her college days, just like in the movie The Sound of Music. Somehow, Maria had assumed that the Baron would be an elderly man with a bushy gray beard. Instead, as she wrote, the tall, impeccably groomed gentleman before me was certainly a far cry from the old sea-wolf of my imagination. The air of complete self-assurance and somewhat lordly bearing would have frightened me had it not been for his warm and hearty handshake. Upon Maria's arrival, the von Trapp children were summoned by their father with a series of complicated trills, a habit George had developed when summoning sailors to his U-boat during World War I. Each trill was different for each child. Again, this seems like in the movie. Their arrival was orderly, without a chorus of giggles and shouts that Maria had expected. As she noted later, I had never seen such perfect little ladies and gentlemen. All were wearing matching sailor suits, and she was quickly told that she was the 26th in a long line of nurses, governesses, and teachers who had been hired to assist the family after their mother's death. As she surveyed this situation, Maria kept reminding herself that she was just on loan for a matter of months. She reasoned that she could survive whatever lay before her. Besides, she learned that it was expected that Baron von Trapp would soon announce his engagement to a Princess Yvonne, and that marriage would provide children with the mother they needed. As soon as she moved into the von Trapp home in the fall of 1926, Maria started making incremental changes. Maria asked for play clothes for the children so they could roam freely. I don't think she used the drapes. When they became bored, she introduced the children to folk songs and Christmas carols. By December, an Advent wreath was installed, Christmas letters to Santa were written, and a tree was decorated. Baron von Trapp participated enthusiastically. He said to Maria, I always feared Christmas more than any other day, but this year you have made it very beautiful. It should be noted that in real life, Baron von Trapp was not like his popular portrayal in stage and film. According to the children, George was always warm and loving. As one daughter put it, he was very fatherly. We were with him all the time. The family would long be distressed by the Broadway and Hollywood versions of their father as someone who was stern and brooding. In March 1927, Captain von Trapp, or Baron von Trapp, announced that Princess Yvonne would soon be arriving. And I couldn't find a picture of her, so I'm having to use the Broadway, Baroness Schrader instead. Little Maria explained, or said to her father, why, Father, do we still need her? She continued, you said you wanted to marry her because we have no one to look after us. But that has changed now, hasn't it? Within hours of reaching Salzburg, Princess Yvonne knocked on Maria's bedroom door and told her that she had surmised that the captain was actually in love with Maria, but that she, Princess Yvonne, would eventually go ahead with the marriage anyhow. But she wanted Maria to stay until her vows with George had been privately said and the children safely shipped off to boarding school. Maria said, I think I need to leave the household immediately, but she did not do so. She knew she had to live up to her bargain, or end of the bargain, and to stay while needed. In the meantime, the head housekeeper resigned, and so Maria was also promoted to that position as well as governess. The Baron, for some reason, appeared to delay a formal proposal of marriage, and Princess Yvonne kept making excuses for not getting together with him. Finally, in a memorable moment, like in The Sound of Music, which you all again may remember, Von Trapp, while at Princess Yvonne's castle, realized he could not marry her, and he impetuously told her so. He immediately headed home. Within hours, a rumor went throughout Austria that no expected engagement between Baron von Trapp and Princess Yvonne had taken place. And the reason? Supposedly, Maria, the governess, was expecting a baby. And out of loyalty and knightliness, von Trapp had realized he had to marry her. Now, this was pure bunk. Maria was not pregnant. But many asked, why had the Baron dumped Princess Yvonne? Shortly thereafter, Maria was arranging flowers in the formal rooms of the Villa von Trapp. The Baron came up to her and declared, quote, the children came to me this morning and said they had had a council among themselves, and the only way to keep you with us would be that I marry you. I said to them that I would love to, but didn't think you liked me. They ran over to you and came back in a flash, crying that you had said, yes, I do. Aren't we engaged now? What von Trapp was asking was for Maria to become a second mother to the children. Maria was dumbfounded. She was 22, and von Trapp was 47. Maria would later write in her autobiography, quote, I really and truly was not in love. I liked him but didn't love him. However, I loved the children, and so in a way, I really married the children. She added when thinking about God, quote, I felt betrayed by the one to whom I had vowed my life and my future, whose will I was eager to do. Now he had lured me into this situation and shown me clearly that his feelings for me were not the same as mine for him. Christ had given me his bride to the Baron. To make this situation look respectable, von Trapp left Salzburg for a matter of months on business ventures. He did not return until 2 weeks before the wedding, which took place on November 26, 1927. Of course, at Naumburg Abbey, with all of the nuns in attendance. In later years, daughter Agatha would see the match as providential. Excuse me. In the months that followed, the von Trapps lived much as they had done before the marriage. The children, even little Maria, attended school. Religious holidays were celebrated with joy. The family sang together, and many visitors stayed with the von Trapps during the Salzburg music festivals. 2 daughters were born, Rosemary in 1929 and Eleanor, known as Lorelei, in 1931. The oldest daughter would write about the early years of the marriage. Mother had an overwhelming personality that drew people to her like a magnet. Today, we would say she had charisma. She adored being the center of attention. As the years passed, Papa became more withdrawn and seemed to fade into the background. Another daughter commented on Maria's tendency to erupt in angry outbursts that consisted, quote, of yelling, throwing things, and slamming doors. That daughter confirmed that her stepmother had a terrible temper, and from one moment to the next, you didn't know what hit her. We were not used to this, but we took it like a thunderstorm that would pass, because the next minute she could be very nice. Interesting. One activity the family enjoyed was hiking. On one hike, the Von Trapps stayed overnight at the home of a farmer whose children had scarlet fever. The farmer did not tell the Von Trapps of the illness, and two of the older girls contracted the disease. So did Maria, who developed kidney stones due to dehydration. She was sent to Vienna for surgery, where 19 kidney stones were removed. She would suffer from kidney problems for the rest of her life. In the 1930s, further challenges occurred. Baron von Trapp removed all of his assets from a safe bank in England and placed those assets in an Austrian bank run by an old friend. To make a long story short, the bank failed and the Von Trapps lost pretty much all of their money. As Maria would write, we had to reduce our standard of living. My poor husband felt like a beggar. The children took on new chores, including raising chickens. With the Archbishop's permission, a chapel was opened up on the main floor of the house, and boarders were taken in. All the while, the family continued to sing, and the new chapel was a perfect venue in which to do so. It was in that setting that the Von Trapps met a young priest by the name of Father Wasner, who admired their singing during Mass and who offered to assist as the family developed their musical skills. This was the beginning of the Trapp family singers, and Father Wasner would remain with the family for decades. In August 1936, the family was singing on their property behind a screen of pines. All of a sudden, they heard clapping. It came from Lottie Lehman, a well-known soprano who insisted that the family enter a local Salzburg festival contest and even considered an American tour. As Maria explained, my husband was aghast. He loved our music. He adored our singing. But to see his family on a stage, that was simply beyond the comprehensive of an imperial Austrian naval officer and baron. Lottie Lehman would not give up her plea, and the Von Trapps entered the contest and won first prize for group singing. George Von Trapp would continue to balk at the thought of his family singing in public. The whole thing was a nightmare to him, noted Maria. But the word was out. Invitations started to pour in from a radio station, from the Austrian chancellor, and even from the Salzburg Music Festival. Word of the family's talent spread, and a European tour was scheduled, always with Father Wasner in attendance. The family sang in Paris and London, Brussels, and The Hague. Maria would write that the family sang for kings and queens and even had an audience with Pope Pius XI. On March 11, 1938, the world changed for the Von Trapps. Germany invaded Austria, and an Anschluss was achieved, the formal union of Germany and Austria. Bells rang throughout Salzburg. That night, Hans, the loyal family butler, announced that he had long been a member of the Nazi Party. Soon, Nazi flags were required to be hung throughout Austria. George Von Trapp dodged the order. He refused to place one in his house. Somehow, he never got in trouble. Salzburg turned into a military camp with German soldiers everywhere. Children were required to repeat the words Heil Hitler and got in trouble if they did not do so. Maria became pregnant several times more and had two miscarriages due to her lingering kidney problems. While consulting with specialists in Munich as a result of yet another pregnancy, where Maria was told to get an abortion, which she refused, the family one day lunched at a restaurant connected to an art gallery. Who was sitting at an adjacent table? Adolf Hitler, surrounded by a bevy of bodyguards. In Maria's words, quote, if one hadn't been so deeply impressed by the fact that this man held the fate of many millions in his fingers, one wouldn't have looked a second time at him. He seemed to be very, very ordinary, a little vulgar, and not very well educated. No resemblance to the hero in the silver armor on the wall. That same day that they had lunch, Baron von Trapp opened a letter sent to him by the Navy Department. The letter asked if he would be willing to take over one of the brand new huge submarines and establish a submarine base eventually in the Adriatic Sea and later on in the Mediterranean. At first, the Baron was flattered, but then realized the implications of the request. To him, it was clear that the Nazis meant war, and that was something von Trapp could not accept. That same day, oldest son Rupert, by then a medical student about to graduate, was invited to go to Vienna and replace the Jewish doctors who had been imprisoned and would soon be sent to their deaths. Rupert could not accept that position either. Within a week, the von Trapps were invited to sing as Austrian representatives at Hitler's birthday party. Such an invitation would have opened to them great fame and fortune. But again, the answer was no. To say no to the Nazis 3 times in a short period of time was dangerous, and the decision was made to leave Austria secretly. The Archbishop's permission was needed to take Father Rosner with him as they exited their homeland. It was approved as the will of God. Unlike in The Sound of Music, the von Trapps did not climb over the mountains to reach safety. However, on the pretext that the family was going on a mountain climbing trip in the Tyrol, they were able to get out of Austria by train. Had they waited a day longer, the Austrian-Italian border would have been closed. Because of the Baron's place of birth along the Adriatic and the border changes as a result of the Treaty of Versailles ending World War I, George carried an Italian passport. Who would have guessed? Even better, he had accumulated funds that were owed to him due to his Navy pension. This meant that the family had money to be able to get to London, aided in part by an impresario named Charles Wagner, who wanted the family to do a concert tour in the United States. By September 1938, the von Trapps were aboard a small ship and bound for the United States. A new world awaited. The Nazis would go on to confiscate their abandoned home. It became the headquarters of Heinrich Himmler, best known for being a leader of the feared SS and also a leading proponent of the Holocaust. Today, the Villa von Trapp is a bed and breakfast if you want to stay there. The von Trapps were, in their own words, completely bewildered when they reached New York City. They arrived with 56 pieces of luggage, including instruments and costumes, but only, according to Maria, with a grand combined sum of $4 in their pockets. They did not know much English, and everything was new to them. Luckily, Charles Wagner, their booking agent, arranged for money to be sent to the family. The concert tour began with a family billed as the Trapp Family Choir. At that point, Maria was very pregnant, but she did not dare tell Charles Wagner, here's her picture, about her condition for a matter of weeks. When he finally found out about her condition, she was 8 months pregnant. He hadn't realized it. Previously, she had somehow disguised her pregnancy she kind of wore busty clothes. And newspaper reviews had described her physique as stately, not realizing she was pregnant. Shortly after announcing the von Trapps, Maria's pregnancy, the von Trapps met a former acquaintance from Austria who convinced them to hire a publicity agent and to invest $700 and do a concert in Town Hall, New York City. This venue was an important one and would provide wide exposure. The von Trapps accepted the advice. Much publicity soon appeared in advance of the concert, which was scheduled for just 2 weeks hence. Now remember, she's already 8 weeks pregnant, so you do 8 weeks with 2 more weeks. Luckily, the baby, who was expected to be a little girl named Barbara, did not arrive early, and the concert went off with rave reviews. Maria wanted a midwife to preside over the birth of her baby, but she found out that the only midwives that anybody knew about were African American. Maria was afraid, in her own words, of colored people, so she ended up hiring a male doctor. Baby Barbara turned out to be baby Johannes, born at home on January 17th, 1939. Today it is Johannes who runs the family lodge in Vermont, along with his son Sam and other family members. The Von Trapps had arrived in the United States on a visitor's visa. Here they are. But the money was going to expire soon. The U.S. Immigration and Naturalization Service did not approve of an extension to the family's stay. They would have to leave, despite a contract for more than 40 dates on an American tour slated to begin in September 1939. The Von Trapps somehow scraped together enough money to return to Europe, and summer concerts were booked in Denmark, Sweden, and Norway, and some of the women actually snuck into Austria. In early October 1939, the family arrived safely back in New York City, although they did have trouble with the U.S. immigration officers when Maria impetuously exclaimed that while she was only intending to stay for another 6 months per visa restrictions, she never wanted to leave America again. This led to temporary incarceration on Ellis Island for the entire family until senators and congressmen vouched for their honesty, and the family was released. World War II had just broken out the month before, so the family stay would eventually become permanent, as Maria wished. She would later write that upon being allowed to enter the United States, she had felt like the biblical Noah when he landed his ark. A new concert tour began that traversed 24 cities, extending from north to south. But audiences were not as robust as anticipated, and Charles Wagner, who had sponsored the tour, admitted to Maria and George that their performances were not made for American audiences. He said, "You need to return to Europe." But the Von Trapps did not want to do so, because all they could think of, even though this was the time of the phony war in Europe, as it was called, that all they could think of was a spider-like swastika stretching its black spider legs all over the map. So they decided to find a new manager, and they had a hard time doing so. New managers who looked at them said, "Your singing is too funereal, you're kind of boring, the Austrian costumes have no sex appeal." And Maria, she literally wrote and said, "I did not understand what sex appeal was." Well, finally, she met one manager, and she said, "Look, if I raise $5,000 for publicity, will you take us on?" And he said, "Yes." He said, "I believe in you as musicians, but now we have to try to coin the gold lump of your artistry into practical currency. For this, we shall start by changing your name to the Trapp Family Choir. From the Trapp Family Choir, which sounds too churchy. I am the manager of the Trapp Family Singers." And that's what happened. Here we are. The Von Trapps were insistent that they become successes, so as to repay the many friends and professionals who had put their money and trust in them. Luckily, the United States government extended legally their temporary visas, and the older boys served in the U.S. military, which gave them U.S. citizenship. And you can see the boys in uniform in this picture. During the war years, the family found a house in Marion, Pennsylvania, very nice house, across the street from dear friends who helped subsidize the rent. Schooling was arranged for the youngest children. Father Wasner, who was still with the Von Trapps, became the bookkeeper accountant for the act. This took the pressure off of George. An entirely new program of music was learned that included a diverse spectrum of songs, many of them in English. The family loosened up and sometimes even began to yodel, which was a crowd pleaser. Concert tours took the family as far as the West Coast. They traveled constantly, here they are singing together. They traveled constantly by bus from September through April, one year giving over 100 concerts. To Maria, quote, "We found out that as long as you were willing to work, America is still the land of unlimited opportunities." Summers were spent in Marion, Pennsylvania, which the family found hot and humid after being used to the cool temperatures of the Austrian mountains. Luckily, one summer, an unexpected invitation came to visit Vermont and to stay in an inexpensive tourist house there. The Von Trapps accepted. Here they are in Vermont. They would be heading to the town of Stowe, which the family adored immediately. As Maria put it, for years we had looked onto a suburban road with limousines passing by or into other people's windows. And now it was like home, mountains and space and sky, meadows, fields, and trees. Here's Stowe in the fall. Here's Stowe in winter. The family had been considering purchasing new clothes for their performances. They decided instead to put the $4,000 they had set aside for costumes into a down payment for a farm. A search began up and down the state of Vermont. Then one day, the Army came calling and asked if the Von Trapps would entertain recruits who were stationed in an old civilian conservation corps camp it had recently taken over. The location was outside Stowe with a sunny slope nearby. A 660-acre farm bordering the CCC camp was for sale, and the Von Trapps were smitten by the beautiful views. The only problem, the buildings were in disrepair. The family prayed and forged ahead with the purchase, with the entire clan being present at the town clerk's office when the deed was signed in 1942. 2 trees were felled and a cross was affixed to a high point on the property. Maria wrote, quote, "One has to have lost a home oneself to understand and appreciate what the words meant, home sweet home." The farm would be called Cor Unum, Latin for one heart. Once more, a new chapter of life was beginning. The Von Trapps continued their concert tours, again including traveling to the west coast of the United States. But the family's heart would now be in Vermont, where they took up small-scale farming and carpentry to fix up the dilapidated home they had purchased. One neighbor commented, "Boy, did Maria work those kids. You'd see those girls carrying things up the hill that no man would want to carry." At one point, as the house was being remodeled in winter, it totally collapsed due to both old age and ineptitude. Rebuilding became an even larger and more time-consuming project, but was aided by good friends and neighbors. The family did not engage in concert tours in the summer, so decided to create a music camp in Stowe and was able to get a hold of the old civilian conservation camp, corps camp that abutted their property. The music camp opened in 1944 and became a stunning success. A few years later, the next endeavor for the family was the creation of the Trapp Family Austrian Relief Incorporated, a charitable organization that aimed to assist their post-war homeland by sending food, clothing, and money to the starving people of Austria, especially to destitute families. Letter writing campaigns helped raise needed funds and provide supplies. Within a 2-year period, from 1947 to 1949, 300,000 pounds of needed goods were sent back to Austria. The only problem by that time, George was dead. In 1947, Baron von Trapp had contracted pneumonia. That diagnosis soon led to a far more grim one, lung cancer. Baron Trapp, who had been a heavy smoker, died in the arms of his family on May 30th, 1947. He was 67 years old. He was buried in a specially consecrated cemetery on the grounds of the family property. Maria would later write, "A few weeks after George's death, I heard of a doctor who in his own practice had had 17 cases of cancer of the lungs, of which every single patient was a U-boat man from the First World War. Thus, it would not be impossible that my husband had died a hero's death." And here is an abandoned chapel on the family property. The family continued to sing for almost a decade after George's death, occasionally aided by other singers as the children grew up, married, and entered new occupations, and sometimes moved away. Among them, Rupert was a physician in Rhode Island, Agatha was a kindergarten teacher in Maryland, Maria, a missionary in New Guinea, Hedwig, a music teacher, and Werner, a farmer. Joanna returned to Austria, married, and had 6 children, and Lorelei lived in Vermont with her husband and 7 children. The Von Trapp's last concert tour took place in 1956. By that time, most of the family had dropped Von from their names and had become naturalized U.S. citizens. One source has written that, quote, only Maria's iron will had kept the group together for so long. In 1949, Maria had published The Story of the Trapp Family Singers. It was this book upon which the Broadway and Hollywood hit The Sound of Music would be based. According to one story that I read, it was Mary Martin's agent who persuaded that star, plus Rodgers and Hammerstein, that Maria's story would make a grand musical. Wheels were set in motion. Maria graciously accepted the idea and even allowed Mary Martin to shadow her in Vermont for 2 weeks so she could pick up her gestures and mannerisms. The Broadway musical, The Sound of Music, with Mary Martin in the lead, would open on Broadway in 1959, play there for 4 years, and win 6 Tony Awards. Julie Andrews, age 29, of course starred in the movie version of the Sound of Music. Mary Martin couldn't do it because by 1965, she was 52 years old. So it wouldn't have been real believable. Unlike with the Broadway team, director Robert Wise, when it came to making the movie, tried hard to exclude Maria from the movie preparations as he had heard that she could be difficult. As he later explained, she was perceived as a forceful and forthcoming person. I ducked and wove and did everything I could to avoid having her involved. She visited the set later in Salzburg, and I invited her to our hotel to have tea. She turned out to be very nice and very helpful. She let me know right away, though, her thoughts on what I was doing. Fearing that Maria might steal the show at the movie premiere, as she had at the Broadway premiere, the movie's producers failed to invite Maria to the film's premiere first opening. When she asked to attend, Maria was told there were no seats left. Unfortunately, in 1955, when desperate for cash, Maria had sold the rights to her story for only $9,000 to a German film company. She never enjoyed the tremendous financial bonanzas that her story would help create, such as the $180 million in revenue that the movie generated, according to her New York Times obituary, not to mention the play. Yet some money would come in due to the producers of the Broadway show, who early on had agreed to provide the family with 0.3% of profits. 0.3%. In the late 1940s, not long after George's death, the family decided to open up a lodge on their property to accommodate guests. It would continue to expand over the years, and in the late 1960s, the lodge opened the first of its kind, a cross-country ski center. But tragedy struck. In December 1980, when the lodge was filled with guests at the height of the Hollywood season, it burned to the ground in a fire whose cause remains unknown. One man died. Maria was rescued by firemen. It would take until December 1983 for the 90-plus room lodge to be reconstructed and opened to guests. And here it is today. Here's another view of it. The property now encompasses over 2,500 acres and includes all sorts of amenities, including timeshares. The slogan of the resort, a little of Austria, a lot of Vermont. In the 1950s and later, Maria actively was engaged in the running of the lodge. She was well known in Stowe for being forceful and imperious and a tough old cookie. According to one close acquaintance, here she is, Maria used to threaten the town manager when it snowed that if they didn't plow her road immediately, she would donate her land to the Catholic Church and Stowe wouldn't get her taxes. She didn't care if anybody didn't like her. She was here to do her business and take care of her family. During the many years of her widowhood, Maria wrote another memoir, Maria. She continued to go on lecture tours and only reluctantly adopted more modern clothes so as not to embarrass her family. In other instances of change, Maria, along with some of the children, including Father Wasner, did missionary work in Papua New Guinea in the South Pacific. There, churches and schools were built. Devotion to her Roman Catholic faith remained a guiding star in Maria's life, as revealed in her work in the Pacific. Maria would go on to receive many awards from the Roman Catholic Church. She also cherished her ties to her homeland. In 1967, the Austrian government awarded Maria the honorary Cross of First Class for improving cultural ties between Austria and the United States. At one point when visiting Salzburg, Maria was even invited by the Austrian government to meet Queen Elizabeth and Princess Anne, who were there visiting as well. Years after her death, Maria Trapp-Platz was named in Maria's honor in the 22nd district of Vienna. Maria von Trapp passed away on March 28, 1987, in Morrisville, Vermont. She died of heart failure 3 days after undergoing surgery. Over the years, Maria had severely strained her heart and consequently suffered from frequent exhaustion. At the time of her death, Maria was 82 years old. She was interred in the Trapp family cemetery on the grounds of the lodge. She was not much older than the children, and they too have followed her in death in the years since 1987. Today, as I've said, the only living child is Johannes, who will be 85 this year. Father Wasner died in Salzburg in 1992 after his service as a missionary in the Fiji Islands and also as a prelate in Rome. So what is the larger significance of Maria von Trapp and her fascinating story? Is Maria the female counterpart to Alexander Hamilton and the saga that the musical premiered in 2015 based on his life tells of the early years of the American Republic? Certainly, the story of the real person in both cases is far different and richer than the portrayal of each on Broadway. Both Maria and Hamilton arrived in America as immigrants, though, and they arrived at pivotal points in history. Hamilton arrived prior to the American Revolution, and Maria in the late 1930s, right before World War II broke out. It is curious that hit musicals would be based on the lives of such disparate individuals. But I think it is right that we honor them in much-loved plays that have entertained many millions of people during the past 65 years. In the case of Maria, our subject for tonight, we should remember that it was her deep and abiding faith that acted as a beacon for so many of her activities and helped sustain her during times of trial. She always aimed to serve the Lord joyfully, as she put it, and she succeeded. All who knew her commented on Maria's enduring optimism and compassion, despite what often appeared as an impetuous and domineering personality. As one acquaintance explained, quote, Maria was way ahead of her time. She took the reins and drove the horse. In the view of Forbes magazine, Maria became an entrepreneur when her family needed one. Maria's life tells us much about the buoyancy of the human spirit, the possibilities for success in America, and most significant of all, the importance of hope, truly a hallmark of a life well lived by Maria von Trapp. Thank you.
And now is that wonderful part of Chautauqua where the audience becomes not only the ones listening and learning, but the ones who have the chance to initiate their own conversations with our scholar. So we'll at this time begin taking questions. Just raise your hand. We have a couple of microphones. We'll bring a microphone over to you so that you may ask Marianne any question you would like.
Thank you. Were the Germans really aware that they were leaving? I mean, the movie shows, of course, a very dramatic chase, but when they left on the train to get away, were the Germans aware?
I don't think that they knew that they were. I don't think it was like the movie where they're hiding behind up on the church, top of the church. I don't think so, but they knew that the time was limited, and they really felt that their moral faith meant that they had to leave. And again, turning down 3 invitations, including being head of a submarine base, you're going to get in trouble with Hitler. And again, they were very lucky. If they had been a day later, they wouldn't have gotten out on that train.
Other questions? If not, we'll have to do a sing-along. But, okay, good. I see a question in the back there.
How many children did they have altogether?
They had 10.
10.
And the musical is only 7.
Right.
So they had the extra 3.
So which ones did they have after she?
They had Rosemary, Lorelei, and Johannes, who runs the inn today. And they have died. And one of the daughters died early on, Martina. She died in childbirth in Vermont. I mean, she was married. She was 30 years old. Something went horribly wrong when she went to deliver the baby, and she died.
Okay.
And that was always a real tragic part for the family.
So she was pretty young in the convent. So
she was 22. She was 22 and he was 47. So the kids were almost as old as she was.
that's why I was wondering how old was the oldest one?
Well, they was in their teens.
Okay.
So they were, Agatha was, she was up there. I think she was close to her in age. That's where Maria hesitated and says, what's God doing to me, making me, marry this old guy, But it must have been good if there's 3 children there, and other pregnancies.
But by way of historic trivia, I just want to throw this out. One of my favorite all-time books is called Felton and Fowler's Best, Worst, and Most Unusual, where these 2 researchers collect their selection of the oddest and most unusual, favorite and worst and best, the best novel, all these things. Lots of opinion. But the worst film editing ever award in their book is given not to the whole Sound of Music, but when the Sound of Music was played in Hong Kong, and of course translated into Chinese, the theater manager didn't like the fact that it had a running time of over 2 hours. So he decided to do some cutting. And so for the Sound of Music, when it ran in Hong Kong, they cut all the music. And that made the book as the worst film cutting ever done in a movie. Hong Kong. It was in Hong Kong.
The movie came out in 1965.
Yeah, that would be the late 60s.
But there was another problem in one of the scenes. I don't remember what the scene was. That there was a crate. There's some crates that were backed up behind them, and one of the crates was oranges, and it said Prerogative Haifa, Israel. And of course, Israel didn't exist in the 1930s. So they cut that. They realized it before the thing went out.
Oh, so it wasn't something we can look for now on DVD.
For it, no.
Shucks.
No, they caught it.
Oh, okay. Yes, a question.
Okay. So I have a question. I believe that they were performing. I thought part of the performers were the family. And this would be probably in the 80s, 1980s and 90s.
There's,
at
there's,
their
there's
place
only
in
one member of the
Vermont.
family now, Elizabeth. I think it's Johannes's granddaughter who is singing, from what I've read.
Okay.
So I don't, at least the last that I saw, that was suggested. So I don't know if some of them maybe have come back for fun, but nobody's doing it professionally,
Okay.
as far as I know.
All right.
And I think they have sing-alongs maybe at the lodge.
Yeah, it appeared to me that it was a big tourist attraction for the summers.
It could,
And
and
it
again,
might
it
have been
could be, up,
camp.
it could
It
be
might
up
have
there
been
at the
the
camp.
camp.
I don't know if they still run the camp, but they certainly have the lodge, and they have things. But Maria lost everything she owned in that fire. I mean, everything was total loss. Any other questions? Yes, there's a question back there. Oh, okay, over there, okay? Yes, all right, go ahead, sir.
Did the Von Trapps ever become American citizens?
Yes, everybody but George. He never did. The boys got it automatically when they were in the Army. Actually, one of them was in the 10th Mountain Division in the European Alps. And Maria, they definitely all by the 50s were U.S. citizens. But again, George never became.
Other questions? Yes, another one in the back.
Another one. Whatever happened to Princess Yvonne, aka Baroness Schrader?
I don't know. I had trouble. I was desperately trying. I spent hours trying to find pictures of her. She disappeared off into something or other, I guess. I don't know. She had a castle of her own, so she was probably doing okay. But again, I don't know what. And see, this would have been 1926, so she had time, before the Nazis came in to do things. But I don't know. But she sure never married him. But can you imagine the rumor going throughout Austria that he gotten Maria pregnant? I mean, again, think about the age difference. He was old enough to be your father.
We remembered the question.
Okay, good.
Are there any remnant singers from the Van Trapp?
There's just, all I know is that there's a granddaughter, Elizabeth, who is the only one, at least whatever I saw, who's still singing. Now, I didn't research it extensively, but I think they may sing at the lodge and things of that sort. But she is only one that has any kind of a career, I guess.
All right. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, we would like to thank you for turning out tonight and to join us here for Chautauqua. Remember, we are looking at the summer Truth or Image. And we are going to have, as with Maria Von Trapp, where you have a certain image of Maria, which we have now learned is maybe not exactly the correct image in truth. We're going to be doing the same thing with other people from history. You'll have a chance to see Charles Dickens. You'll have a chance to see the original cowboy, El Vaquero. You'll have a chance to see Stagecoach Mary Fields, one of the most interesting Western heroines ever that you probably never heard of. And we will even have Mama Cass Elliot, though she preferred to just be called Cass Elliot. She didn't want to be the big mama. So we'll have her as well, and a chance to see them all. In fact, next month, we will have the presentation about the life of Cass Elliot. So you're all invited back then. Thank you so much for helping us put this together. Thank you all for coming.